Hello, I'm Marina Johnson, and this is TABLEWORK, a TAPS podcast series where we interview the artists and theater makers behind our productions on what it takes to get their productions from the page to the stage. This episode features TAPS PhD student Caitlin Main, who is writing and acting in her Grad Rep piece, Waiting for Magnapinna. Grad Rep is a project meant to showcase the work of our second-year graduate student artists. Join us as we learn more about Caitlin's project. Caitlin, I'm so excited to talk with you today about your Grad Rep piece.
Thanks, Marina. I am excited to be here and share about it too.
To start us off, let's start with questions or ideas that you are currently exploring in your PhD work.
Yeah, so I'm in my second year of the PhD, and I think the ideas I'm exploring are still pretty broad, but I like to say that I work at the intersections of performance and environment, and particularly performances that engage with water, the hydrological cycle, what I'm kind of calling hydro art practices. And that can be things about questions about like how we represent oceans and how those representations impact our engagement with oceans. But I also kind of have this little like sub project embedded within where I'm really interested in the question of underwater performativity too. So, in performance studies, we deal with theater as sort of an art object, but we also have the idea of performativity, that actions and words bring things into being. And embedded within that, we have sort of ideas of liveness often, proximity and distance. And I wonder how those things sort of transform when submerged into an oceanic medium. So in that, I've been exploring things like free diving, underwater cameras, submersibles, how those can be perform in their own ways and shape our engagement with the ocean.
Those are really fascinating questions and objects that you're working with. That's really fascinating. For your grad rep piece, so the grad rep is a significant part of the second year PhD. It's one of the milestones. Can you tell us what your project looks like and then also what sparked the idea for this project?
Yeah. So the project is called Waiting for Magnapinna, and it is a devised piece of theater. And I kind of describe it as being set in a laboratory and also set in a future that has already been deeply impacted by deep sea mining. So in the piece, we have two technicians, and it's kind of unclear who they work for. There's a sort of certain set of ambiguities that the audience has to embrace. But what we know is that they're in search of this witness, the elusive Magnapinna squid, or you could say the big fin squid, for its expert testimony on the impacts of deep sea mining. And the piece itself is kind of a fathoming of a way of going deep into all the information that we as terrestrial land people currently sort of engage with on a day to day basis. So we're looking at found texts like international law, scientific data. We use works from online message boards, so things like Reddit posts, and thinking through how those shape what we know and can know about the deep sea. So there's sort of this collision of sense and nonsense in this laboratory environment, sort of an effort to think about and think through the impacts of extractive capitalism and its contradictions, as well as fantasies of the abyss, and these sort of very messy encounters between land and ocean. And we do this through text, video. There's also live music on stage. Yeah, so that's what the project is. And how it germinated was kind of a multiplicity of sources. Um, First, the academic. I'm interested in oceans and performance, and there's a recent text by Stacey Alimo that came out in 2025 called "The Abyss Stares Back," and I was really inspired by this work where she talks about things like William Beebe's scientific illustrations, as well as clickbait sort of Instagram reels of deep sea creatures or in the New York Times that could get circulated, and how these both play into tropes of the sea as sort of alien or other or an empty space, as well as how they maybe resist these tropes and facilitate another type of aesthetic, which she kind of thinks of as like a creaturely, weird aesthetic. Um, and I was interested in this text because it really deals with the visual plane and the textual plane a lot, but it questions about what happens if we embody these things. So, hence the intervention with theater and live performance. I was like, there's a gap here. Yeah, so that was one point. The second point was that in my own artistic practice, I'm always interested in exploring relationships between humans and land. And this comes in part from a very autobiographical sort of impulse. I grew up in coastal British Columbia and I lived in Alberta too. And those are two areas that at least where I was living, I really witnessed firsthand the impacts of extractive industries. So in BC, particularly, I remember a significant experience of a forest near me being cut down, the land sold and the trees cut down, and how that informs certain power relations in the community, who benefits from the loss of the forest and who doesn't. And similarly in Alberta, I experienced this at the oil and gas industry. So that kind of tying that interest in land and the impacts of extraction to the ocean and the deep sea in particular was a big jump in some ways because I hadn't artistic jump and stretch and having to challenge myself to make a show about a place that I'll never get to go, likely, um, versus making from a place where I have sort of an embodied sensory lived experience. So that brought us to the issue of deep sea mining, which maybe I'll touch on real quick, just kind of explaining what it is. So we're kind of at this critical point in history where exploratory licenses, contracts, sorry, by issued by the ISA, which is the International Seabed Authority, have gone ahead. So these are exploratory licenses to mine the deep seabed, where there are basically these polymetallic nodules that contain minerals that, at least how it's framed, is that they would be useful to support a green transition. Um, so there's exploration of that, and now there's sort of a push from certain mining companies to move forward quicker than scientists and communities who have relations with the sea would like. Um, so these companies want to push forward and extract, essentially. And there's a lot to be concerned about because the impact of deep sea mining in international waters and national waters is still really unknown and uncalculable to science, but it's likely going to be catastrophic because we can make predictions on basic information that we have. We know that these mining machines will sort of descend from the shore to the bottom of the deep sea, and therefore they're going to implicate the entire water column. Proposed technologies also disturb sediment on the deep sea bed floor and create these plumes. There will also be disturbances insofar as like noise pollution. Um, and other things we know too is that, well, I guess one of my favorite facts is um, is, sorry, catching my thoughts for a second here. Um, is that some of these deep sea bed creatures have an incubation period of up to 4 human years. So, with that in mind, the sort of possibilities of regrowth and regeneration in the deep sea is incredibly slow. And sort of these swift processes of extraction are going to leave sort of deep scars over time. Um, so, with that, there's a lot of uncertainty about the impact. And we know that our oceans are incredibly important insofar as they have, half of our oxygen comes from the oceans. They regulate the climate. They provide livelihood and food. Um, and especially given our climate crisis, there's just so much unknown. So there's a push towards a moratorium on deep sea mining, and this is kind of where the sort of political impetus of the performance comes. Yeah. So those are the merging of those sort of three.
That's amazing, Caitlin. I mean, amazing. I sit in awe of you in several ways here right now as an artist and a scholar. You're bringing these things together, and then also just the scientific knowledge that you brought forth and made it really accessible. This is not something that I, or maybe a lot of people listening, know as much about. And so I'm really grateful for the ways you were able to break this down into the sort of zones of impact and tie them all together. Thank you. Um, I have a question about the squid, and maybe just for a brief answer, but I don't know much about squids, and you have a particular name, Magnapinna, in the title of your piece. Can you tell us a little bit about this squid and why the squid is sort of one of the characters, I'm assuming, in this piece?
Yeah, so the squid is kind of the Magnapinna squid is this big fin squid, this huge squid that's in the deep sea, and it's a very solitary, elusive creature. I think it's been cited like 50-ish times around there. which is, I guess, still maybe a lot considering some deep sea creatures, but um, there's it's hard to like identify obviously or track down a squid. But Ato and I at the beginning of our, I should say, Ato is one of my collaborators. He's performing with me on stage. We devised the work together. And at the beginning of the process, we spent a lot of time just like looking at deep sea creatures and picking out ones that we were particularly drawn to. And we were kind of obsessed with this squid just for the sort of visual impact of it. So, in a sense, it's kind of like an interesting psychological choice of like what creatures are we drawn to and why. So us as these lab technicians, we hyperfixate on if we could just only find the squid, then we could stop everything. And I think there's something interesting there about the sort of creatures that we choose to attend to, and also the idea, the sort of impossible endeavor of getting an actual spoken testimony from a squid.
Yes. Oh, that's really beautiful and fascinating. Well, you just mentioned Ato as one of your collaborators. Who else are you collaborating with on this piece, and how have those collaborations shaped the work?
Yeah, so Ato is the one of my collaborators, as well as Anna Globkova. She is a PhD student at Karma, and Ato is as well. So that's the Center for Computer Music and Research at Stanford. And Anna has been really important because one thing that we know about the ocean is that sound is really important for communication, and Anna is our sound designer. um, so she has been helpful insofar as the live music on stage. So we're going to be working with synths on stage. We have two Russian synths that kind of occupy this really interesting space between at moments sounding sort of natural, insofar that you might feel like they sound like water, the ocean, or like the call of a whale, but they also are able to sort of attend to industrial noises. Um, so Anna's been really helpful in us working between these two sort of areas of sort of nature and culture, and to not, attend to that as a divided space, but to bring them together through sound. And especially sort of in us kind of diving in the second part of our show, we dive into the deep sea. Um, and it's a moment where we sort of reckon with the already material impacts that we've had on the ocean insofar as underwater sea cables, militarization of the sea, those sorts of things. So sound has been really important in our show. Um, we are also working with Ryan Dukes, who's our lighting designer. And Ryan has been excellent too. Again, I think all the designers have it pushing against tropes of the deep sea. And one thing that Ryan has been really attentive to is the sort of how can we light the deep sea area beyond ocean is blue. Um, so I'm really excited to share what Ryan has come up with. We're also working with Bren Bartel, is our scenic designer. And Bren has been important in sort of thinking through the lab as both a realistic and a sort of like surreal or absurd space, because we are working in sort of a layer of abstraction and unknown in this performance. Um, so Bryn has created a potato altar. The potato is a central sort of metaphor, as well as like performing object in our show that I think people will have to come see the show to really understand. Um, so that's going to be very exciting. And then Ezra Malosh is our costume designer. And again, is able to sort of attend both to a realistic feeling of the lab, as well as an absurd feeling of the lab through certain costume choices, which again, I'm not going to say too much about because I think they really will stand out on their own in performance. But yeah, it's been a great team.
Oh, that's really exciting. I mean, a lot of the collaborators you've mentioned, their work speaks for itself in different ways in projects we might have seen already. But you really had me at synths on stage and then potato altar, because I have not heard potato altar as a phrase, let alone a phrase that you then use as a provocation to get us to the theater. So that is very exciting to me.
I could say one thing about the potato, if that's kind of connects to the rhetoric of like mining CEOs. The potato has kind of taken on a life of its own, in that one CEO sort of compared the polymetallic nodule to a potato on the seabed floor. So we kind of took that and amplified it to the extreme.
That's fascinating. Can you just say the nodule that they're comparing to, in your opinion, is it anything like a potato?
I mean, no, insofar that the nodules take 7 to 10 million years to grow, and a potato takes takes what,
A season?
a season, yeah.
Oh my goodness, I wish people could see what a reaction. Okay, yes, those timings are nothing alike. Um,
Yeah.
oh, so curious about this, thank you. This is research I will have to do on my own, just for the sake of time, but I'm grateful that you were able to share that detail with us because I think also this discrepancy between sort of the images that people in politics or people who have other interests in this world are using, and you sort of turning them on their head in different ways for this piece is one of the reasons that we love art, right? And the things that we do with objects and symbols. Um, Interesting. And the design sounds really beautiful. So I think that's something we can look forward to is knowing that this is not just a piece that we'll see sort of our typical oceanic imaginaries on stage. The designers are working in different ways here. When audiences encounter this work, what do you hope stays with them afterward? Are there particular questions or feelings or conversations, not in a prescriptive way, of course, but just things that you're thinking, wow, it would be great if they walked away talking about this or something like that?
I think my number one thing is I just want people to, think about the deep sea and the ocean a bit more closely. I think it's a space that's easy to forget about because it feels so far and distant. Um, but obviously we are in a deep relationship with our oceans. So I would just love people to sort of, if there's any images or, we have lots of like found text and noise and stuff. And I would love people to take any of those little elements and use it as a springboard for their own research to understanding, the deep sea broadly, the beautiful, fascinating creatures that exist down there, and as well as the issue of deep sea mining, of course, because I think there's obviously a lot of things that are happening in our world, and deep sea mining is one of them. So I think it's important to be informed on that as well. Yeah, so I'd love, people to do research after if they feel compelled. um, I think other things too. I think the themes, we're dealing with extractive capitalism, and so we're dealing with it in the deep sea. But I also do think a lot of the sort of metaphors that we're drawing out in the contradictions, and the sort of like tight web that extractive capitalism creates that's hard to get out of, is relevant to industries that we have on land as well. So I think sort of questions of how we shift away, um, can apply to to multiple industries and multiple facets of life. So I think that's something that I would want people to think through as well.
Those are great things. And I mean, I'm thinking about those things now after this conversation. So I can only imagine that the piece offers these and more to the viewer. Will end with a question that I actually should have asked you much sooner, but I think I've been very struck by all of the information you've been giving us. You said that this piece is a devised piece. You are leading the devising process. I believe you're also performing in the piece. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. And so you're devising and you're performing beyond all of your roles as the artist scholar who sort of has come up with this piece.
Yeah.
And so we'll have the chance to get to see you on stage very soon.
Yes, we will.
Excellent. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for this beautiful conversation. I can't wait to see your grad rep piece. I'm sure the feeling is very mutual for everyone who's listening. Is there anything you would like to add before we end?
No, I think we've covered a lot. I'm excited to hear people's interpretations.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Me too. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you, this piece, and the potato altar very soon.
Thanks, Marina.